I really look forward to introducing Bryce Lane. He does a lot of programming for the Arboretum, and I really don't know if he is more passionate about horticulture or is he more passionate about educating people about horticulture, because I see the energy that he brings to all the program. And I hear there's like many of the folks in the audience who have taken a program with him, so it's like a little family reunion out there, as I understand, so great to have you all here. Bryce Lane retired as a distinguished undergraduate professor and lecturer at NC State University in January 2014. He continued to teach part-time at NC State and the J.C. Ralston while focusing on his career in public speaking. Bryce has earned his bachelor degree in plant science from the University of Massachusetts and his master's of horticulture from the Ohio State University. He is a devoted gardener who has gardened in the same spot for more than 30 years. Bryce has served as interim director of the Arboretum twice. And I was lucky enough to actually be working here during one of those terms. It was wonderful. But today Bryce is going to speak about the most common garden weeds and discuss the best prevention and management strategies we can use in our home garden. You're in for a real treat with our final speaker, Bryce Lane.
So, good morning.
I don't know what's happening all of a sudden.
It's just flashing?
Yeah, we can work on changing the projector if you'd like.
I have a question.
Ready for the light?
Not yet. This will keep you somewhat interested. So I have a couple of questions. I love coming to symposia like this and being the last speaker, okay? Because I learn so much. But I also take notes while I'm here. And are you all overwhelmed so far?
Yeah.
I'm going to go home and bulldoze my garden down. So, listen. So Steve, let's talk about Steve first. I've never met an entomologist that wasn't like weird. And I'm convinced. I wish Steve were still here, because I am convinced that his favorite movie is Alien. Because did you see how incredibly excited he got? The closer we got to the strange mouth parts and the way those... Very weird. I am so thankful that I can groom my own face. That was the first thing I thought of. And someone asked about insect bites in the garden, if there's anything organic. What I do is I take leaves I crush up leaves of American beautyberry, Calicarpa americana, and I wipe them on my legs and my arms. And the mosquitoes don't seem to really enjoy that very much. I read that online a number of years ago, and it seems to be somewhat useful. So I thought I'd at least share that with you. And then Mike, is Mike here?
Beautyberry?
Beautyberry, yes, American beautyberry. The Asian beautyberries seem to also work as well. So Mike made a great point, and he made a number of great points in his talk, and some great photography too. You saw the beauty of pathogens, the beauty of diseases, but there are a few points that he made that I really want to stress before I start talking about weeds. The first thing was that sometimes when plants get infected, it's cosmetic, and if we're patient, we shouldn't jump the gun when it comes to dealing with that. And it's kind of like, a lot of times I get a lot of leaf scorch on my Japanese maples. Now, leaf scorch is a disease caused by growing Japanese maples in the South. Okay? Please understand that diseases are what we call the symptom, and the cause of the disease could be human intervention, it could be some fungus, it could be a bacteria, that type of thing. And so I thought it was really great. It's like sometimes we just need to be patient, okay, and understand that if the disease overwinters, understanding the life cycle of the disease, if it overwinters in the flower, the spent flowers of the camellia, then I'm going to make sure that every one of those spent flowers of the camellia is gone before the next time. So it kind of makes sense. It's not kind of a knee-jerk. It's kind of understanding the biology of our plants and understanding the biology of the animal or the organism that's going after our plants. I love the idea. It's really kind of made me very sad. Excess water favors many pathogens. There's nothing more to say there. Anything that stresses the plant favors the disease. Stop stressing your plant. Okay? And I say that tongue in cheek, but please understand that most of the time it's us who stress our plants out. Why do we stress them out? Well, we stress them out because we put them in the wrong spot. Right? And when we put the plant in the wrong spot, or it's because we haven't prepped the soil appropriately, and so the plants start out being stressed. We know that when we're run down, we're more susceptible to diseases, insects, weeds, whatever might be, so I think if we understand, and the very premise I'm going to talk about relative to weeds is let's start with knowing our plants and knowing what they need and putting them in the places that they'll be successful. Because then we eliminate most pests. Maybe 80% of the pest problems we eliminate if we select the right plant for the right place. It's really all about plant selection. Not that I'm going to launch into a talk on plant selection. Chris emailed me about a month and a half, 2 months ago, said, would you speak at the Southern Gardening? I said, great. I had a lot of different talks I was going to do. I said, what do you want me to talk about? He said, weeds. I said, okay. Then I thought, what the heck am I doing? Talking about weeds, I don't even have pretty pictures. Well, I've got some pretty pictures to show. Okay. Another important point he made is that the symptom that you see may be caused by 7 to 10 different organisms or different conditions. Okay? And so we got to be really careful that we don't jump to conclusions. Right? Because by jumping to conclusions, we could be treating the plant for something it doesn't even have. Okay? It has a symptom. The glyphosate yellowing on tomatoes could be caused, by a dozen different causal things. From diseases, to insects, to poor nutrition, all kinds of things. So I thought that was a great point. And I just want to let you know that I've had slime flux. Yeah. Not me. I have an oak tree that's historic. It was probably here during the Civil War, and it got a real bad case of slime flux. And I was patient. It's healed. When I say it's healed, it no longer has the slime flux, and the wound in the bark is slowly closing up. Okay, so sometimes we just need to be patient and tolerant within the context of our own gardens, and that's a great lead into weeds. Oh yeah, there were a couple of introductory comments. I thought I have a whole 3 pages on glyphosate too, by the way, because I knew what you were going to ask me when we get to questions, and I'm going to stop at 12:15, so you won't be able to ask me anything about glyphosate. Some of you are not smiling. Please understand that the handout that you have kind of gives an outline of my talk. Please don't use it right now. It's for you to look at later. Sometimes handouts become a detriment to learning and listening, so I gave it to you. But there are 2 references underneath. What Mike said about the Master Gardening Handbook. Oh my gosh, it's a great reference. Chapter 6 is all about weeds. So if you really want to get down and dirty with weeds, go to chapter 6. It's free online. You can go from there. Okay, so those are all my introductory comments. Let's get started. Tim's going to go do the lights. So, welcome and good morning. I am a well-seasoned gardener. That means that I've been gardening a long time. I'm old. And I've gardened in the same spot for 36 years. I moved into my home, a small 3-bedroom ranch with 2 young children in 1983. And so it was a starter home, and it turned out it's going to be where I'm going to finish. Okay? But what that does for me is it allows me to be able to speak to being a gardener in the same spot for 36 years. That means I've made all my mistakes. It means I've had all my challenges. All the aphid infections I've had have been in this space. All the weeds I've had to contest with here, the deer, all those things I've done in the same spot, and it's kind of like looking at my life as I look at my own garden and think about all the different stages of life I went through, okay? And for me as a gardener, and this may be the case for you, it may not, but for me it's not about the end result, it's about the process. It's about the doing that thrills me. The idea, yesterday afternoon on my hands and knees on my front walkway, pulling out spotted spurge is part of what gardening for me is all about. And some of you are saying, well, that's ridiculous use of your time. Not if you're a gardener who enjoys the doing, okay? The concept of anticipation thrills me. I'll buy $400 worth of plants and I'll lose 20% of them. But it's not the losing, it's the anticipation that all 100% might just make it this year. Okay, you understand? So there's me, and I had a crush on Carly Simon. Okay? Anticipation, remember that song? Okay, so I'm a child of the 70s. That's my decade. Okay, and oh, man. I got to change the slide. Anyway, but it's that aspect of anticipation relative to gardening, which is really important. And when I say gardening, I want to make sure you all understand what I'm talking about, because in this day and age, I say gardening, people think vegetables. I say gardening, I'm talking about anything. Anytime you're using plants in outdoor spaces for a wide range of reasons. For food, okay? For pleasure of a specific kind of plant, for combinations, color, artistic, to attract pollinators, hummingbirds, all those things, that's all gardening. And so for me today, when I talk about gardening, it's not just vegetables, it's not just fruits, it's the whole kit and caboodle. I remember one time I was in Switzerland and I went to someone's home, and it was a garden, and the front garden had everything in it. It had tomatoes, it had apple trees, it had dwarf shrubs, it had flowers all in one, and I thought, man, there's a unique idea, because American gardening is so compartmentalized. This is the vegetable area, this is the fruit area. We're moving away from that now, and lots of people are writing books about things that really, Europeans and other people in other places, other gardeners have been doing for a long time. But I want to make sure you understand when I'm talking about garden weeds, I'm not just talking about vegetables, okay? And so, yeah, gardeners, the challenges we face in southern gardens. We have heat. Okay, I grew up in New England, okay? I know, as a gardener, I didn't understand heat load until I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina. Now I understand heat load, I understand deluge, I understand drought. There's all kinds of challenges we have. We have light challenges. As gardeners, if we don't consider the light requirements of a plant, then we might as well go ahead and introduce insects, diseases, and even a failure for it to look what it's supposed to look like on the tag. Right? How many of you said, why doesn't it look like it looks on the tag? Right? Well, we know that light plays a very important role. My claim for gardening is we need to understand how light influences plant growth, and we need to understand how soil influences plant growth. If we understand those two biological, botanical principles from a cultural and a physiological perspective, then we're not going to make mistakes that lead to a symposium that's all on pests. Right? And so light, full sun. What does full sun mean? Many of you have heard me say this 10 times. I'll say it again. Full sun is 6 to 6.5 hours or more of uninterrupted sunlight. So when a plant says full sun, that's what you're supposed to give it. But what do we gardeners do? We're optimistic. We put it in 4 hours of full sun. We go, oh, it'll be fine. Okay? And then we wonder why it doesn't look like it looks on the tag. Soil. The most important thing, it was great when Mike was showing the Leyland cypress, and he was saying, raised bed, if you don't have the right, prep your soils. Because now we know that excess moisture in soil causes root rot, diseases that infiltrate that soil that we really can't get rid of afterwards. Let's prep our soils. You want to be good pest managers, good weed managers, good management of insects and diseases, then start learning the plants, learning what their light requirements are and what kinds of soils they do, and take care of those two things first. Okay, I'm done. Okay, water, we need to understand water, how to manage water, right? We know that right now for irrigation purposes, get the water to the root system. You know that's a great weed management process too, because you get the water to the root system of the plant, and therefore you're not providing water for weed seeds to germinate in other places where there's space. And then of course we got all the pests. You've learned all about insects, diseases, animals. I'm surprised there's not a talk today on animals. Deer specifically. I'm going to be speaking up at the Master Gardener College in Virginia this September. A new talk I've created is called "I Love You, Deer, but Not You, Deer." Okay? And how to manage this animal in the home garden, because everybody loves to talk about it. There's all kinds of questions, but nobody wants to face the music and go, sorry, you can't control them. And then of course weeds. And that's why I came here this morning, is to talk to you a little bit more about weeds. All right, and there's a method to my madness. When Chris asked me about weeds, first thing I did was went to my photographic library and I said, crap, I don't have any slides on weeds. And so what do you suppose I've been doing the past few weeks? Okay? Everywhere I go, I bring my camera with me, and if I see a weed, I take a photo of it. Okay, in my own garden and then in other places. I was out running the other day, and oh my gosh, this big, the most beautiful, almost ornamental patch of nutsedge. Gorgeous, all right? And there's a reason why I'm calling it that, but the idea that we've got to come up with weeds, and so look, out on a run, there I am in the neighborhood, and I see this nutsedge. I stopped dead in my tracks. I had my iPhone with me. I took photographs, and this was great because it's flowering. Okay, nutsedge flowering. It's like that's horrible. Okay, because well, from an ornamental, and you're getting ahead of me, man, but from an ornamental perspective, it may actually, it's lovely, nice lime green stems, triangular in nature, spread by underground structures called rhizomes, create little tubers. It'll never go away once it shows up. It's a great landscape plant, unless you have it where you don't want it, right? And it's so incredibly obnoxious in that regard. Okay, because look what it does. It doesn't care whether there's another plant around. It grows right up through it. All right? Or this mailbox garden. Okay? I love this around the mailbox. I was out running, I stopped, and this is called chamber bitter. Okay? I didn't even know what it was called, but I have it everywhere. All right? And so there's chamber bitter, and I think there was a zinnia garden here. Got chamber bitter 1. But how lovely. Look at the leaf texture, pinnately compound leaves with small spines. It's really quite attractive. It's just not where you want it to be. So what is a weed? Maybe that's where we need to start. What is a weed? I learned this way back. I felt like I was an undergrad today in weeds class, and then it's in plant pathology. I think I would have been an entomologist if I hadn't fallen in love with plants. Insects are just remarkable. But what is a weed? Okay, here's the most common definition. It's a plant out of place. And so who determines whether it's out of place or not? Gardener. We do, right? We're the ones that determine whether a plant is a weed or not. Okay? There's some other criteria we use to define plants as weeds, because some actually, in fact, we use the term oftentimes for when we talk about exotic plants, not native plants. They can be weedy. So there's some things that relate to what it means to be weedy. All right? But a plant out of place. If a plant is growing, if this wonderful English ivy is growing in a place where you don't want it to grow, then by definition it is a weed. Okay? Add to that it showed up without your permission, okay? That it just showed up somehow. The seeds got disseminated. We don't know exactly how, but it shows up, and it has bad habits. It has habits that are bossy, obnoxious, okay? That very precocious. All right? These are fast-growing plants that produce lots of long-lasting seed. It's not just the seed volume, which in many plants are considered weeds. Lots of seeds per plant, okay? I tried to take photographs of crabgrass that was getting ready to give its seed away. It's like thousands of them in one. I'll show you the photo I tried to take. But it's like copious amount of seeds in a short period of time. Copious amount of seeds in a short period of time. And check this out. Weeds have this characteristic of being able to lay in wait longer than you might think. They're incredibly patient. Okay, they have a long life, even though it's just this little seed that's alive. It could last anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 years before it awakens to do its dirty deed. Okay? Not only that, but when it does awaken and it starts to germinate, these are plants that are able to establish themselves quickly. Okay? Once they get a foothold, why do most weeds that I have in my garden grow on my patio, my brick patio, in between the bricks? They have this incredible ability to take advantage of a very little bit of soil and a little bit of water and go crazy. It's quite remarkable. So we identify that. Plants that are incredibly competitive, get out of my way. You saw that photo of that mailbox garden. Okay? A very competitive plant is one that may compete for, what do they compete for? Lots of different things. They're persistent. They stick around for a long time, either because their children will show up the next year or because they have structures that allow them to persist. Okay? And obnoxious. Obnoxious just means they can actually look quite ugly. Here's English ivy. This is the spotted spurge, which hides well in pine straw. All right? I was on my knees yesterday pulling that out. Why was I on my knees yesterday pulling out so many weeds? Because we had 1.5 inches of rain the day before. And weeds get kind of confused, and you can pull them out much quicker and much easier after there's been a good rain. Okay. Oh, and then a weed is a plant whose virtue has not yet been discovered. He said it. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, okay, so a weed is just a plant with a bad reputation, and eventually, when we realize it has some benefit, then it becomes a good plant. Works in reverse too. Kudzu came here in the mid-1800s as a possible solution to erosion and cattle feed. Okay? See, it was brought here on purpose because people thought it had virtues. Okay? When I moved to Raleigh in 1981, kudzu stopped my car on I-40. I'd never seen kudzu, and there it was. Okay? Now, that is not a weed, but some might consider it a weed. This is Colocasia esculenta, okay? Coal miner. I love it. Look at the leaves that brown. Look, beautiful plant. I bought a little 4-inch plant at Big Limmer's this past spring. I planted it right there. This is last week. Isn't that wonderful? Okay? But some might call this a weed, and here's why. Do you notice these little guys running along from the base? It's like, what could those be? Not only do they run along the base and then boop, they put up another plant. Oh, here's another one, and there goes another one, and here goes another one. So us gardeners, we get all excited, and so we do like plant giveaways, and we cut them and we propagate them, and then we have them, right? We have them. Now, show of hands, who's new to Raleigh? There you go.
Be careful where you point it.
But my point is the point I'm trying to make here is I will continue to grow this in my garden. I don't consider it weedy. I consider it high maintenance. Perhaps just because some plant is high maintenance doesn't make it evil. Do you know someone who's high maintenance? Right? That doesn't make them evil, does it? Okay, some might disagree. But here's my point. For some, this may be a weed. For others, it may not. Okay, and so we have to acknowledge the fact that at some level of there's got to be a certain integrated pest management, we call it economic threshold. There's got to be some kind of gardener's threshold as to whether or not this is a weed or not, and whether I'm willing to take responsibility for its ability to be dominant in the landscape. Because then if I decide it's a weed, then it's out of there. Okay? Instead, I have decided it's not a weed, and I'm giving them away today.
What's the name of it?
It's Colocasia esculenta. It's elephant ear. Elephant ear. Okay. And this one happens to be one that is hardy here in Raleigh. Okay. So you plant it. You don't have to give it any kind of protection and whatnot. And you can see how much it enjoys a very well prepared soil, I might add. Okay. So what are some characteristics of wheat? They produce abundant seeds, leading to rapid establishment. Kind of a different way to put exactly what I said a minute ago. They have long-term seed dormancy. Did you know that the soil, any soil you have in your property, in your garden, whatever, that there is a bank of seeds, hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of seeds live in that soil, dormant, right? It's called a soil seed bank, right? And what's the one thing that's keeping those seeds from germinating? Light. It's moist, it's warm, it's in soil, but most of our weed seeds require exposure to light. I'm not talking about the light that drives photosynthesis. I'm talking about exposure to light to stimulate germination. Okay? And so this long-term seed dormancy thing can be a real challenge when we start talking about management practices. Okay, we will. Oh, by the way, research was done with all the talk on global warming, and we now call it global climate disruption. Because that makes more sense, right? Because it's not always just getting warmer, it's getting crazier, all right? Highest response to increased carbon dioxide. Because of the increased carbon dioxide, plants are actually happy about that because they take in carbon dioxide to photosynthesize. So you would think that most plants would be thrilled about that. And they are, if they had a brain, but they don't. Okay? However, there are a group of plants that tend to be even more sensitive in a positive way. When I say positive to their growth, to carbon dioxide increases in the atmosphere. Guess what kinds? Those that generally tend to be weedy. Okay? Guess what's at the top of the list? Poison ivy. Isn't that interesting? Okay? Not only that, but a lot of weedy plants have vegetative reproductive structures in addition to the seeds that they produce. Underground structures that we actually take advantage of in agriculture, potatoes, sweet potatoes, all these underground structures that tend to promote a reproductive cycle that's vegetative, that doesn't involve any sexual reproduction. Also, they're able to occupy a wide variety of sites. These plants are incredibly adaptable. Where the tomato needs 6+ hours of direct sunlight and perfect soil, all right? The weeds that grow around the tomato don't really care. Just give me a little bit of soil and I'll grow. They're very, very adaptable. And they reduce plant growth. They reduce yield. They reduce appearance, okay, by competing for light, moisture, nutrition, and space, all right? This pigweed is going to ultimately compete for light, moisture, nutrition, and space. Does that make sense? Okay, so we know, we're now developing perhaps a bit of an understanding of what weeds are like. And somehow they end up getting, they tend to be unsightly, except for this woman over here who thinks nutsedge is beautiful. Let's talk a year from now. So look at this crabgrass. Look at that. Okay, can we say one plant can produce thousands of seeds? And those seeds are the kinds of seeds I just talked about. All right? So I don't know about you, if I had crabgrass and I couldn't pull it out, I would never let it get to this point. If I could do nothing but cut the crabgrass and keep it from producing these, then am I not reducing crabgrass pressure in my region? And that's just a management technique called mowing. All right? I thought Steve was great. He's talking about his lawn, which he doesn't have, but he does have something green. And my father-in-law had a lawn like that, and he was the envy. And also, everyone in the neighborhood envied him because he was always mowing his lawn, and he never had any brown patches. But they hated him because they were getting weeds from his lawn, because his lawn was mostly weeds, clover and all kinds of things. He just kept it he kept it mowed. It was really quite incredible. So here's my brick patio, and this is one of the healthiest plants I have in my garden. I don't even know what it is, all right? It has managed to figure out a way to, seed got in there, germinated, and in a very short period of time, oh, look at this little cute one right here, and then there's some moss growing and whatnot. But weeds have this incredible ability to horn in, so to speak. Now I know, for those of you who are new here, common weeds, this is not a comprehensive talk on weed ID, but I want you to develop an understanding for some of the more common weeds in the garden. First of all, we've got to make sure we understand their life cycle. For instance, the annual weed. Okay, an annual weed is a weed that completes its life cycle in a year, and completing its life cycle means it germinates, it grows, it reproduces, and it lets go of thousands of seeds. All right, that's an annual, and annual weeds are broken into two groups. The winter annuals, like you see these three right here. Okay, these are examples of winter annuals, things like chickweed, henbit. Maybe those are the two most common ones, and there's a third one as well, which we'll talk about. But the winter annuals, generally, their seeds germinate in late winter, early spring, and then they're producing seeds by the time it starts to get hot, right? So that's when you have to contend with them. I have a cul-de-sac in the neighborhood I live in, and chickweed comes. Right? And I'm out there pulling the chickweed as fast as I possibly can. And my neighbor's like, why? I read that it's an annual and it'll just disappear and it won't be there. I'm like, yeah, but before it disappears, it's going to lead to thousands more next spring. And so I'm trying to get them out before. Then there are the summer annuals. Okay, and the summer annuals are the seeds that germinate late spring, early summer, and then they'll seed up, and a lot of them are doing their thing right now. It's a big list. A large number of summer annuals that we have to contend with. And then the group that I actually hate the most are the perennial weeds. Okay, perennial weeds are those plants that generally, in addition to producing seed, often have underground structures. Dandelion is your classic example of a perennial weed. Okay, not only does it produce copious amounts of seed, but it overwinters as a taproot. All right, and comes back from that taproot. And that's why I remember as a kid growing up, my parents had these weird forks with a little thing, and they'd go down there and pull it out. I got it! And my dad would look at my mom and go, you got half of it! Find the rest! He was incredibly upset about that. And then let's not forget the woody weeds. Weeds that actually, they stick around more than just their root system, but they actually, like English ivy is a woody weed. Right? It's a woody weed. It doesn't just have an underground structure. So let's talk about some winter annuals. Okay, the three biggies, henbit, nettle, and chickweed. There's chickweed, little tiny white flower, shows up just about everywhere. Then the henbit is one that you get a lot, and some might argue that, oh, when henbit's flowering, it's beautiful. Might attract pollinators. True, but again, remember it has all those other characteristics that we've assigned to weeds. Okay. By the way, some people would argue that redbud is a weed. It's a native plant that produces lots of seedlings in places where you might not want them. So again, Tim, I saw you raising your hand. Let's be careful how we use this term, and let's be careful how much we indict plants that might make our lives more miserable. Okay? And then nettle. Nettle and henbit often get confused, all right? But notice the segmenting of the leaves and the flowers. You'll notice this is a little bit different, where two leaves show up on opposite sides and they bunch very close together. The summer annuals. There we go. The weed everyone loves to hate, and that's crabgrass. My favorite is the spotted spurge, which shows up in lots of places in my garden. And pigweed is one that is really doing its thing right now. I was walking by a community center in a park, and these flowers are starting to open up, and this is when all hell breaks loose, because the flowers open up, then you get the seeds, and it's getting all ready for next year. So these are three big ones. And then, of course, when the spotted spurge, you can see the little ID feature there. See the little spots? Sometimes they're more pronounced than others. The sunnier the spotted spurge is in, the more burgundy the leaf, okay, and the stem, and then the more shady, the more green you get, all right? But can you see look at all the places where it's producing flowers and fruits and seeds. Okay, spotted spurge. You getting depressed? Okay, so there's a little chamber bitter there, and then, oh my gosh, this is all crabgrass, and it's all in places where it's not getting mowed, and therefore guarantee you next year this little mulch bed will be full of crabgrass. Okay, more summer annuals. Chamber bitter. Oh, don't we love chamber bitter? That's the one that was the mailbox started. Here's the problem I have with this weed. It is by far one of the most difficult weeds to pull by hand. It has a root system that binds tightly to the soil, and unless the soil is incredibly wet, it's going to be difficult to pull out. Okay, there it is there. Second, dayflower. Perhaps some of you think, oh, this is like a house plant. No, it's a weed. Dayflower produces these small blue flowers, which when it's flowering, it's beautiful. However, this thing will take over an area. And then oxalis, yes, the favorite. Once oxalis flowers tend to be beautiful. I kind of cringed a little bit when Steve said mow high, because then the little weeds can get in and they can flower and it's going to attract more. There's a balance. Let's face it, there's a balance. I am a big advocate of mowing high. Please understand that that's for the sake of turf survival in the mid-south. And we'll talk a little bit about turf. I'm not going to talk a lot. This is not a talk about controlling weeds, managing weeds in your turf grass, although we'll have some comments to make about that. There's this beautiful oxalis. It's gorgeous unless it's growing in a place where you don't want it, like in my path, next to my rock wall, next to the spotted spurge. And then this guy. You've met my friend Japanese stiltgrass, okay, microstegium. Okay, one little seed, boom, you got a patch of it. It's great for mass planting. It'll grow in shade, it'll grow in the sun, it'll grow everywhere. You've got to get it before it starts to flower in the fall, unless you get even more the following year. Summer annuals, there it is there, and there we go there. It almost looks a little bit like bamboo, but that's a dirty word too. So, some of the perennial weeds. These are weeds that have not only produced seeds, but also have underground structures or are woody in themselves. Nutsedge is perhaps the bane of every gardener, because as soon as I pull that out, another one shows up. It either shows up because of the underground structure called a rhizome that has another plant is produced at its tip, or it's shown, you see, there's the rhizome, so there's one I pulled up and this one came up behind it. So if I pull this out and I pull this out and that stays in there, that's like a stem cutting. Oh, yeah, and then it produces these. These are called tubers, like the potatoes we eat, but in nutsedge we often call them nutlets, okay? So oftentimes when you pull the weed, the nutlet remains, and guess what that's going to do for you? It's going to give you some more nutsedge. So it's very, very difficult to manage. This little patch here, I weeded about 3 months ago. About 2 months ago, I weeded it, and of the nutsedge, hand weeded it, and it's back. Let's not forget our friend the dandelion, which has every part of it is edible, wine. So there's argument there, right? There's argument. I grew up in New England. There was nothing more beautiful than a lawn in full dandelion flower. For me, my dad, it was a different story for him. And then English ivy, oh my gosh, here's an invasive plant that we are now calling a weed. It's a woody weed in central North Carolina, and it is incredibly invasive. And not only that, but it's displacing plants from their natural environments. Okay, there's the problem with something like that. No, how many of you have ever, smilax, right? Oh, this weedy vine with the little spines on it. Oh my gosh, it's obnoxious. I live adjacent to woods, and so I find myself receiving lots of seed of a lot of woody weeds that I have to contend with. The Virginia creeper poison ivy debate. Okay, both incredibly invasive, although some would argue that Virginia creeper makes a wonderful vine, beautiful fall color. By the way, poison ivy also has beautiful fall color in this house. Okay, so first and foremost, how can you tell the difference? You've got 3, you better flee. You've got 5, you'll be fine. All right. So spot the pinnately compound leaf of the Virginia creeper always relieves us of the concern that it might be poison ivy. Okay. When in doubt, run away. I'm serious. I oftentimes, because here's what happens when Virginia creeper germinates as a small seedling. Guess how many leaflets it has? 3. So until you get very intimately close to and you have some experience with either ones, be careful. Wait, let it mature a little bit, and then pull it out. Of course, there's our friend poison ivy. Okay, and pokeweed. Pokeweed is this incredible. It overwinters as a large swollen root system. All right. Not only that, it produces all kinds of seeds, which the birds will get as quickly as they're ripened, and they will spread them for the plant, and they'll do a very good job. But here's a young pokeweed. This is a mature one that obviously has some insect problems. Yay! And then there's the classic flower of the pokeweed. Of course, this is what it looks like this time of year, where it has really quite beautiful reddish colored stems and leaves are turning yellow and weedy. So now we've got at least a little bit of idea of some of the more common weeds. All right, but frankly, I don't care what they are. What I do is I care about their life cycle, so I want to know what they are so I can know how they behave, because then I can manage their behavior if I find them in my garden. All right, but I want to talk about management, okay, not control. Please understand, when it comes to diseases, insects, and weeds, and other pests as well, until 1980, the agriculture lived with a philosophy called annihilation philosophy. And the annihilation philosophy was very simply this: if you had a pest, you treated it so that it would be completely and totally annihilated. All right? In early 1980s, there were some scientists who actually grew to realize that weeds or insects or diseases could coexist with crop plants at a level that wouldn't bother the profit. Right? And they said, well, wait a minute, what if we manage the weed population, or what if we manage the pests and only treat them when they get above that economic threshold? Okay? My mom did this in our backyard garden in the 1960s. She grew a row and a half of tomatoes. And 10-year-old, I said, hey Mom, why do you grow a row and a half? She said, well, the one row is for us and neighbors and family, and this half row is for the bugs. That's what she said. And so what was my question to her? I said, hey Mom, how did the bugs know to go to the half row? Typical 10-year-old, I was trying to problem solve. And she just patted me on the head and said, oh, that's so cute. Okay? But my mom obviously planted enough tomatoes to stay above her economic threshold, her personal preference threshold. So when we talk about management, y'all, you need to apply those principles. How many aphids are you willing to tolerate in your garden before you say, I have to do something? Well, after Steve's talk, I just learned that I don't have to worry about aphids on my Asclepias, on my butterfly weed, because they're exclusive to that and it's not life-threatening. Okay? Now, I'm still going to do something about it, but what I do is very psychologically soothing and satisfying. I take my thumb and my finger and I squeeze and I rub them off and I squish them all. It's very, very, after a long day at work, that's as much fun as watering. It's that zen. Oh, you're all going to go now. It's fantastic. So here are the keys to reducing weed management tasks. You want to reduce how much weeding or weed management you want to do? Here are some keys. 1, promote good plant health. Culture. The word horticulture comes from 2 Latin words: hortus, which means garden, or anytime you see plants, and culturae, which means to take care of. Culture, to take care of. So when we talk about gardening culture, we're talking about weeding, we're talking about fertilizing, planting, all those things that people do in and around their gardens. That's the culture, right? That's not environment. Okay? Promote good plant health. One, culture. The other, manage the environment. Well, we can't manage the environment, but we can certainly manage where the plants, what environments we put our plants in. Does that make sense? That would make us good horticulturists. You know what I'm saying? All right? So let's concern ourselves with that. That would mean that we need to have a talk on how light influences plant growth, okay? How soil, and then start talking about what we can do culturally to improve those so that we promote good plant health, because healthy plants are more competitive against their predators. We need to be concerned about preparing our soil so that it's excellent and that our beds are well prepared. And you know, the Arboretum, we do a lot here, okay, helping you learn these things, okay? Check out the classes. Okay, I'm starting a class just this coming Monday, and Chris, I don't know whether there are any seats left or not.
As of last night, there was 2.
2 seats left, and it's basically home landscape garden care, a month-by-month approach. And basically, we're going to look at, okay, so what should we be doing this month? Okay, we're going to approach it sideways as far as that's concerned. But we'll talk about tasks that are good culture. It's really a culture class. Okay, but we have a workshop in February about soil and bed preparation. So keep an eye on the Arboretum event calendar, see what kinds of classes are available. Of course, if you're a member, you get in for a little bit cheaper. All right, proper plant selection, right plant, right place. How many times have you heard this? How many have heard this, right plant, right place? How many actually know what it means? All right. First of all, that means we got to know our plant, and we got to know our place, and we're picking the right plant for the place that we have. I think right plant, right place is the wrong way to say it. I think right plant for my place should be the right way to put it, because I have to understand my place before I go and buy plants. Case in point, I live right behind Millbrook Exchange Park. There's a giant award-winning, federal-funded, federal grant dog park. People bring their dogs there to play and fight with each other. My wife and I walk through the park around there, right? And as we're walking through around there, okay, I see this young lady walking a Great Dane. And I said to her, "You must live in a huge house." She says, "No, I live in a 1-bedroom apartment." I said, "What on earth? Where does he go?" She says, "Everywhere." Did she select that dog based on the space that she had? No, that's what we do as gardeners all the time. Oh, look, it's pretty. Oh, I want it. Where will it grow? Oh, it'll do fine right here. Okay? Proper plant selection. Let's get to the good stuff because I'm running out of time. Weed management. We've got mechanical. That would be cultivation and hand weeding. Okay? And cultivation and hand weeding is based on timing. We need to understand the life cycle of those plants. 2, mulching. Organic and synthetic. Synthetic would be plastic, landscape fabrics. We'll talk about those here in a second. Biological. Hey, did it ever occur to you as gardeners we should use the living things that we're growing in our garden to prevent and control weeds? Okay. But Bryce, that means you might be suggesting that we pack it in. Pack it in! That way you can buy more plants. Sorry. You know what? I don't use pesticides in my garden, but not for the reason you think. It's not because I'm scared of them. Okay? I've done my research. I've read the science. It's not that they scare me any more than scrubbing bubbles in my bathroom. The only difference is scrubbing bubbles in my bathroom, nobody sees me doing. Everybody sees me spraying things outside. No, I don't use pesticides because I don't want to spend the money on those chemicals. I want to spend money on plants. So I'm going to choose plants, I'm going to build my soil, I'm going to garden to reduce the pesticide pressure. Herbicides, selective versus non-selective. We'll talk about what that means. Pre-emergent versus post-emergent. These are almost self-explanatory. Pre-emergent, before they come out, after they come out. Contact, they have to be touched. You have to touch it. Okay, so there's Japanese honeysuckle and invasive weedy vine, and there's more of our lovely crabgrass. So let's talk about these management practices. Cultivation and hand weeding. Okay, we're removing the young plants before they seed. That's what cultivation would be involved with. Cultivation and hand weeding. You say, what's the best tool? Whatever you have. You know, I used to have a hoe. Now I have this. Okay, this is called a long necker. All right, this is a cultivator. I can dig holes. I can plant. This is a multi-purpose tool. It's great for cultivation. It's great for cultivation where I'm removing the weeds when they're young, tender, and easily disrupted from the soil. And I can go shallow. Please remember, go shallow. Go shallow. Okay? My first job as a young preteen was to hoe the garden. And I'd hoe the garden, and then a week and a half later, there'd be more weeds than there were than when I took out. And my dad would laugh at me, he says, don't go so deep. Because the deeper I went, what was I doing? I was exhuming those dormant seeds that were in the seed bank. All right? So, and this kind of a cultivator too. Hand weeding. Okay? But follow this with mulch. Follow with mulch, because when you follow with mulch, then you create a greater barrier between the sun and those weed seeds that have been turned over by your cultivation or by your hand weeding. Mulching to control weeds. It reduces weed seed germination. It reduces moisture loss, so you're improving the soil. Not only that, but mulching builds soil. Even a 2-inch layer of mulch every year will improve the soil, the chemistry of the soil, the physics of the soil, and the soil's ability to grow plants, including nutrition. All right? Please don't ever put more than about 2 to 3 inches of mulch in any given bed that you are mulching, be it vegetable garden, be it anything, 2 to 3 inches. Any more than that creates an almost impervious barrier. When the water falls, it doesn't get to the soil beneath, 2 to 3 inches. Please don't put your organic mulches down early. Any organic is anything that came from plant material. Your bark mulches, your pine straw, don't put them down too early, because if you put them down too early, then the soil is going to take longer for that soil to warm up. And seed germination and plant growth is a function of soil temperatures as much as it is a function of air temperature. So don't put them down too early, okay? And please, no plastic or landscape fabric. I don't care what you read, okay? I'm going out on a limb. I'm going to share with you my opinion. This stuff doesn't go away, okay? It makes it more difficult to plant in the future, and it becomes trash. At some point in the life of the garden, it becomes trash. Say, well, Bryce, but look what it's called, weed block. It must be. No plastic. Let the plastic be used by the commercial strawberry growers and those agricultural crops that benefit from warming the soil up early so you can go out and pick strawberries early, and good weed protection. And not for the landscape. I do not recommend that, but I do recommend using newspaper as a pre-mulch treatment. What are you talking about? Well, here's what I mean. You see, this is what happens. The mulch doesn't go anywhere. The plastic mulch, oh look, there are weeds growing on top. Who knew? Right? Look at this. And then how are you going to plant? And you put mulch over that. It's just not highly recommended to use. It's not that efficient. Okay? And a word about turf and weeds. When I talk about turf and weeds, please understand that turf grass, there are 30 million acres of lawn turf in the United States. 30 million acres. Okay? We Americans have a fetish for turf grass. Turf grass uses 3 to 6 times as much water per square foot. It is high maintenance. It requires more nutrition, and more pests inundate turf than any other plant per square foot. Okay? I'm not against turf. I just don't think we should have as much as we do. Perhaps what we need to do is reduce turf square footage, then we reduce weed pressure, we reduce insect. You say, what about the insects that Steve was talking about? Well, if there's no turf, guess where they are? They're in all those plant beds going, this is even better than turf. I'd say that in front of Steve. Oh, by the way, that was my birthday present for my wife. She gets it now. After 42 years, she gets it. Okay? She refused to help me spread it, though. Right? So there's my lawn. That's mine. Okay, you say, well, wait a minute. This is it? Where do your grandkids play soccer? In the field behind the house? In the park? Okay. So maybe we need to rethink the way that we manage community. Just saying. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
How do chamomile lawns do you have any experience with that? They're supposed to be more drought tolerant.
You know, I've not read anything about chamomile lawns here. There are lots of different plants for lawn replacement. Yeah. Anytime you do a monoculture, it's going to require a higher level of maintenance. Anytime you do a monoculture. People are going to say, well, what's the best mulch? That mulch, which is, ready, write this down, most available, most economical, and most preferable. Most of the research doesn't say one mulch is any better than another when it comes to weed management. Okay? But if you put newspaper down first and then you mulch, then you've added a layer of an organic layer, a layer that's going to break down. You add a layer of protection from the light to the weed seeds. And that you can really get more bang for your buck with newspaper. And my favorite mulch is Timberline soil conditioner. Nope, they haven't paid me to promote this product. You can get it at a big box store that has the same color scheme Okay? It's not blue, it's orange. Anyway, for about $2 and something cents a bag. And it's a great mulch, but it also is a great soil builder. Biological weed control. Using garden plants to suppress weeds. Pack them in. Plant your beds carefully, rethinking traditional spaces, and be patient. Okay? This was my spring garden. Okay? Look at all the space for weeds. Okay? But if you look at how they were planted, they seem somewhat crowded. You've got to be patient if you're going to use biological weed control and be committed to maybe hand weeding in the early spring. Okay? Because this turns into that. And there's not a stinking weed that can get through all that. Okay? That's biological control. That's biological control. Where are the weeds? And if they're in there, so what? Nobody can see them anyway. And they're still being outcompeted. Okay? Biological weed control. It's one of my favorite ways because I get to plant more plants. Here's biological weed control with a monoculture of ferns underneath the deck so the weeds can't grow in amongst it. But it requires some level of patience. My first example of biological weed control came many years ago at an English garden where there's the turf path. These were all beds, highly packed together plants. And I asked, what do they do for weed control? He said, what do I have to do for weed control? Biological control. Biological weed control. Okay, let's finish with herbicides. Okay, the elephant in the room. Prepared chemicals used to prevent or kill weeds. Did you hear what they're called? That's an herbicide. A prepared chemical used to prevent or kill weeds. It could be a chemical that's organic. It could be a chemical that's synthetic. What it is, it's a chemical. Okay, just like vinegar is a chemical. The pre-emergence chemicals are those that are applied to the soil before the weed seeds emerge. Perhaps the most popular one is something that we always are looking for in our lawns called a crabgrass pre-emergent. Oftentimes mixed with a fertilizer, we put it down in the spring to prevent crabgrass seeds from germinating. Okay? The home gardener will use something perhaps called preen. Okay? Trifluralin is what's in preen. That's the chemical in preen. You sprinkle it in your garden bed, okay, and it will prevent seeds from germinating. Seeds. So if you're going to go back and plant zinnias, seeds, you probably want to do that and let them germinate before. Follow the recommendations. Can you use this in vegetable gardens? Yes, but there are some vegetables they don't recommend it to be used for. Crabgrass. That's pre-emergent. Post-emergent, they're selective or they're non-selective. But these are post-emergent selective. You know, a selective herbicide is one who says, okay, I'm an herbicide. Anyone here that is wearing a button-down shirt, I can kill. And I'm not going to kill anybody else. That's selective. Okay? And you've heard selective herbicides came out of the Vietnam War. Okay? Came out of trying to figure out how to find the enemy by selectively killing vegetation. But a post-emergent, that means after it's come out, selective means it kills one type or group of plants. Contact herbicides. It's got to touch the plant. It's got to touch the plant. Okay, you've heard weed and feed. That's a fertilizer. By the way, these are the big three that are often found in broadleaf weed killers, selected for broadleaf weeds in turf. 2,4-D, MCPP, and dicamba. It's a cocktail of those three. What it does is it's absorbed through the leaves of the weed, of the broadleaf weed, and it kills them from inside out. That's a systemic approach. All right? Weed Be Gone is just the same material without fertilizer. Okay. But understand, since this is absorbed by green plant tissue and they're broadleaf plants, if it's windy or if you spill it on other plants that are ornamental and desirable that are not grasses, they run the risk of being damaged like you saw in the tomato plant. That make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. And they do well in both warm and cool season grasses. Here's the problem with warm and cool season grasses. I can't stop myself. We live in a place where both don't grow very well. I'm done. It's true. We're on the margin. We're on the southern margin of cool season grasses. We're on the northern margin of warm season grasses. And Bermuda grass is a wonderful turf grass until it gets into somebody's flower bed or somebody's fescue lawn. Then it's a weed. And then it's impossible to get rid of. Herbicides. Non-selective contact herbicides. Okay, here we go. Glyphosate. Product name Roundup, but now there are tons of companies, because it's outside the patent, there are tons of companies that have glyphosate. Glyphosate is non-selective. If it's green tissue and it's actively growing, it's absorbed by that green tissue, killed from the inside out. That's a non-selective herbicide. That would be one that you could walk through your garden beds and spray on weeds, as long as you didn't spray it on plants like your tomatoes and others nearby. That's how it works. It kills any plant that is actively growing green tissue. Safe for the environment, you ask. How about safe for humans, you ask? Thankfully, Tim just held up the sign that I have 5 minutes left. Can we get a light? To answer all your questions about glyphosate, first of all, when it's applied, it binds tightly to the soil. That chemical that does not get absorbed by the plant leaves gets in the soil. It's bound tightly by the soil. Generally, it's about a 6 month before it's gone. How does it go away? Bacteria attack it, and it goes away. Okay, this is all from all the articles I read for the past week preparing for your questions. Okay, studies. Does it cause cancer? Oh, by the way, Roundup's not going to get in groundwater, okay? It's not going to be leached to groundwater. Why not? Because it's tightly bound in the soil that the bacteria will ultimately break it down in 6 months. Okay, so in 2017, National Institute of Health did a study and determined there was no correlation or any association of glyphosate to causing lymphoma. The 800 studies were done and sent to the EPA in 2018, saying that the conclusion was glyphosate was not cancer causing. Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, their scientists there, after looking at all the data on all the studies done, came to the conclusion that there was no literature, there was no link to cancer. Okay. 2018 National Institute of Health study, glyphosate not associated with cancer risk. You're saying, Bryce, you're not being fair. Okay, the World Health Organization, International Agency for Research on Cancer, recently determined that it's probably carcinogenic. And so they put it on the list. Right next to red meat. Please, this is not an editorial statement. I'm telling you what I read. Okay? Because last night after my steak, I found this. Okay? But the take-home message about herbicides and about, I'm not trying to tell you what to, but remember, just because someone wins a civil suit doesn't mean that's truth. It just means someone won a civil suit. I mean, O.J. was acquitted. I wrote that, and then I scribbled it out, and then I wrote it again. But here's the perspective, okay? What do we know? We've got to do good due diligence about researching the materials we use in our garden. But somehow I'm convinced that garden chemicals are way more highly sensationalized than bathroom cleaners and the things we find under the sink. I'm not saying that because I think they're all safe and we can bathe in them. We have to be good citizens and research this. But then we have to use good sense and decide whether or not my doing spot Roundup in my garden might cause cancer over going to Ruth Chris Steakhouse once every month, which I can't afford to do anyway, but you follow what I'm saying? Okay? So I'm not trying to tell you to use this non-selective contact herbicide or don't use it. I respect you one way or the other, but have a good reason. Have a good reason. Don't have a sensational reason, because those will get in the way of the truth. Where is the truth? I don't know. It's somewhere in the middle of this piece of paper. I'm not sure, but I've made the decision for myself. Okay? My wife thinks this is the devil, so when she's gone, that's when I spray it. That's not true. Last thing, this may be the most important thing you learn. Forget Roundup, go with vinegar. 1 gallon white vinegar, 2 cups Epsom salts or 1 cup of salt, 1/4 cup of Dawn dishwashing liquid, put it in your sprayer, either this one or a giant backpack sprayer. It's a non-selective contact herbicide that will kill anything that's green and actively growing. Does that sound like Roundup? Yeah. Sounds like glyphosate. This is vinegar. So this was what it looked like. It was treated with vinegar. This is what it looked like afterwards. Does it happen overnight? No, it takes longer. Okay? Yes?
So I've heard bad things about adding the Epsom salt to the spray because in theory the salt can eventually accumulate in the soil and you can't plant things there.
Then just
What's
use
the
vinegar.
argument
Then
on
just
that?
use vinegar. I've heard the same thing, and then someone said, well, don't use as much. Use regular salt. Okay.
Still salt.
What are we treating our roads with when they freeze over? Again, I'm not arguing. If I'm spot weeding, to me, I'm not adding that much of any material that's going to.
One way or another.
Right. But this is a method. Please understand. You have to understand how it works, and then be reasonable with what your expectations are. You're not going to. It's not going to happen overnight. Okay. Put ingredients into a spray bottle. So, for those of you who like schedules, late winter, mulch. Spring, mulch again. Pre-emergence, cultivation after they emerge. Hand weed. Summer, hand weed. Use a contact herbicide, non-selective like Roundup or vinegar. Fall, hand weed, cultivate. But here's my last thing I'm going to say. Y'all, don't let weeds rule your life in the garden. Okay? And consider maybe getting down on your hands and knees and getting close with them and pulling them out after a rain. There's something very zen about that. I still have some dirt under my fingernails. That's why I garden. Okay. So thank you for your attention. Any time for questions, I'll be around afterwards to answer any specific ones. You good? Anyone have a birthday today? Not now. There you go. You have a granddaughter who has a birthday? There you go.
Fantastic. I have to share with Bryce giving this away to whoever had a birthday. I understand that's what JC did. He always had a book, and when he did a talk, he would say whose birthday is it. So I love that these traditions continue. So big hand for Bryce Lane.